This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
The Israeli army withdrew from the town of Beit Hanoun in the northern Gaza Strip after carrying out one of its largest operations in the Palestinian territories in a year. The residents were left burying their martyrs. A Palestinian medical source said that during its week-long attack on Beit Hanoun, the Israeli forces killed 52 people, half of whom were civilians. Today alone, 8 Palestinians were martyred by Israeli gunfire and missiles. Shock appeared on the faces of some people as they were surveying the amount of destruction to buildings, roads, water pipelines, and electricity lines.
Israeli occupation, military machinery, and tanks withdrew from the town of Beit Hanoun, deploying to its outskirts after carrying out a bloody incursion that lasted about 6 days, martyring and injuring dozens of people. As the army withdrew, residents mourned in their homes and held funeral processions for the martyrs who died in the battle with the occupation army. This aggression left the region in a state of severe shock. Even the mosques were not spared from this aggression.
What we witnessed today is one of many forms of massacres and slaughters, which makes the hair on the back of your neck stand. Nothing can explain or justify this savage aggression. We are talking about thousands of people who have been injured and hundreds of martyrs in the past few months. Israel commits violations against the Palestinian people. With much regret, no one in the international community is willing to say the word no.
Signs of surprise and shock appeared on the faces of the residents of Beit Hanoun. They cannot believe that this is their hometown, which the occupation forces devastated by destroying its landmarks and replacing them with death, destruction, and devastation. The Israeli military operation inflicted severe losses, destroying roads, electricity grids, and telephone lines. They also destroyed the main and secondary water networks that lead to citizens' homes, making living conditions in this area even more difficult.
It is as if the town was shaken by a massive earthquake, causing severe damage to the infrastructure. Our losses were assessed very quickly. More than $10 million are needed to repair damage caused to drinking water systems, roads, and electricity grids.
The Israelis did not leave a stone, a tree, or anyone untouched. They do not want to leave anything behind that has anything to do with Palestine. The Arab leaders just stand and watch us.
After the operation, dubbed Autumn Clouds, redrew the map of Beit Hanoun, the occupation announced that it has ended its military operations there. Shortly after, the occupation forces continued its violent attacks on different areas of the Gaza Strip. They launched 2 missiles on the home of the leader of the organization, Female Freedom Fighters, to lift the siege east of Jazeera refugee camp, martyring many Palestinians. The Israeli occupation may have withdrawn its tanks, armored vehicles, and machinery from the town of Beit Hanoun, but every structure here brings to one's mind the image of the occupation and the extent of its hatred and revulsion that is anything Palestinian.
In our top story, a Qassam rocket exploded in the heart of Ashkelon this afternoon. No injuries were reported. Palestinian terrorists fired 5 Qassams at Israeli communities, with the bulk of them landing in open areas. Earlier today, Israeli troops pulled out of Beit Hanoun in Gaza, ending an almost week-long operation aimed at preventing terrorists from launching Qassams at Israel. At the same time, as IBA's Eli Wolgalenter reports, 9 Palestinians were killed in Gaza today by IDF fire.
After 6 days, Operation Autumn Clouds was completed early this morning with the pullback of infantry, engineering, and armored forces. Defense officials said significant operational achievements were secured. The operation's purpose was aimed at clearing the area of terror activists and weapons centers and destroying the Qassam rocket infrastructure, namely production, transporting, and launching cells. 8 Qassam rocket cells belonging to Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Popular Resistance Committees were eliminated in airstrikes and ground attacks during the incursion. The IDF also discovered large stockpiles of weaponry, among which were sophisticated explosive devices unlike those already familiar to the IDF. More than 50 Palestinians were killed in the operation, as was an IDF soldier. The Army said that while the firing of Qassam rockets has not completely been halted, their frequency is expected to drop soon. Late yesterday, before the IDF forces started leaving the area, a suicide attack was thwarted thanks to the alertness of Givati soldiers. A female suicide bomber from Islamic Jihad, an 18-year-old student at Gaza's Islamic University, blew herself up near to the troops after they became suspicious and called on her to stop as she was approaching. The attack was thwarted also in part because of intelligence the Shin Bet provided the IDF a short time before the terrorist arrived in the area. One IDF soldier was slightly wounded by shrapnel in the incident. It was the first suicide bombing since a Tel Aviv falafel stand was blown up on April 11th. Meanwhile, 6 Palestinians were killed today in 2 separate incidents. Israeli tanks responding to Palestinian gunmen who fired 2 rocket-propelled grenades at soldiers hit the home of Jamila Shanti. She is the Hamas lawmaker who organized a women's protest last week that allowed gunmen to escape from a northern Gaza mosque under Israeli siege. Her sister-in-law and 3 others were killed in the attack east of the town of Jabalia. Simultaneously, an IDF unit operating in northern Gaza, near the area of the former settlement of Beit, shot and killed 2 armed Palestinian members of the Al-Quds brigades, one of them the son of Khalid al-Batash, an Islamic Jihad leader. Eli Waldlenter, IBA News.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has demanded that Hamas hand over the kidnapped IDF soldier Gilad Shalit to him so that he can be the one running negotiations with Israel, that according to a report in a Saudi newspaper. Abbas said he made the establishment of a new Palestinian government conditional on the release of Shalit. Meanwhile, Abbas and Hamas Prime Minister Ismail Haniyeh failed to reach agreement last night on what was described as a, quote, decisive discussion on the formation of a national unity government, including Hamas and Fatah. The 2 leaders continued meeting today. Meanwhile, Hamas political bureau head Khaled Mash'al said today that Hamas will continue to kidnap IDF soldiers until Palestinian prisoners are released. And U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice has said it's better for Hamas to be in government than to operate outside the power structure and carry out terrorist actions. Speaking at a pro-democracy forum in Washington, D.C., Rice said the international community must work to promote political expression in the Middle East.
I'm not so sure that it is better to have these groups running the streets masked with guns rather than having them have to face voters and having to deliver. So when I am told, well, you know, your Middle East policy has allowed Islamists to come to power, I think, well, all right, so was the answer then that the people of the Middle East don't get to have a voice in who comes to power? What it really says is that there has been an underdevelopment in the Middle East of legitimate channels for political expression that would have produced moderate, centrist-leaning parties, and that has to be worked on.
And joining me now in the studio is Foreign Ministry spokesman Mark Regev. Mark, thank you so much for being with us. You heard Condoleezza Rice together with us. She thinks Hamas needs to be in the government. Israel refuses to do business with Hamas, so where does that leave us?
I think she was making a general point, not talking specifically about Hamas. But to be fair, it's not just Israel that refuses to speak to the unreformed Hamas government. It's the European Union, Canada, the United States, Australia. Even the UN itself. Kofi Annan has ordered his people in the UN apparatus not to hold political discussions with Hamas until they meet the 3 benchmarks that he articulated: recognition of Israel, renunciation of terrorism, and of course recognition of the signed agreements.
Well, however, there does seem to be a split between American and Israeli public opinion, and in fact just this afternoon a senior U.S. official who might have been the U.S. ambassador to Israel told Israeli reporters about certain issues that Washington has with Israel. They do not want Israel overflying Lebanon. They want Gilad Shalit released, but they also want the Palestinian members of parliament released. Is there a strain between Washington and Jerusalem?
I don't believe there's any strain in relationships. On the contrary, I think we share a strategic outlook. We share an outlook on what needs to happen. On the issue of Lebanon, Israel, the United States, Europe as well, were all behind the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701. And I think the onus today is clearly on the Lebanese side. We've completed our pull out of Lebanon. In doing so, we've implemented our core obligations under the resolution. On the Lebanese side, I'd remind you that the two Israeli hostages, Regev and Goldwasser, are still being held hostage despite the fact the UN says they have to be released. The arms smuggling, unfortunately, still goes on. Illicit arm transfers from Syria to Lebanon, to Hezbollah, which shouldn't be done under the resolution. And, of course, finally, the issue of a Hezbollah armed presence in the south. They shouldn't be there. Unfortunately, they still are.
Mark, let's go back to Gaza. The Defense Minister said today that Operation Autumn Clouds has run its course, served its purpose. But what purpose was that? We had a Qassam rocket this afternoon, a short time ago, landing in the center of the town of Ashkelon. What was actually achieved, and what do we have now that we did not have 1 week ago?
I think everyone understands that there's not a magical military answer to the Qassam question. I mean, if it was an easy issue to solve militarily, we would have done it already. I think the understanding is that by these sort of operations, we are limiting and preventing them from launching Qassam rockets against our civilian population. And I'd say to everyone that if the Palestinian government did what it was obligated to do, what it committed to do, and that is to prevent the launching of these rockets, then of course there would be no need for these Israeli military operations.
Saddam Hussein returned to court today for his genocide trial in the Anfal case, 2 days after he and 2 other co-defendants were sentenced to death by hanging in the Dujail case.
2 days after he was sentenced to death by hanging, the ousted Iraqi president returned to court in a separate trial for his part in the genocide of the Kurds in the 1980s. Hussein urged the Iraqi people to come to a reconciliation.
I call on all Iraqis, Arabs and Kurds to forgive, forget and reconcile. Thank you.
During today's trial session, the court listened to the testimonies of the persecution witnesses in the Anfal case, who accused the former president of taking part in the genocide against the Kurds. More than 82,000 Kurds were massacred between 1987 and 1988.
They lined us up and opened fire in our direction, and we all fell to the ground.
Meanwhile, the Iraqi capital, which was under a lockdown in anticipation of Sunday's verdict, was relatively calm after the curfew was lifted. Saddam and 2 other co-defendants were sentenced to death by hanging in the Dujail case. Sporadic attacks and clashes have erupted in various Iraqi cities and towns. A roadside bomb targeting an American military vehicle exploded in Fallujah, killing 3 people and injuring 8 others. Moreover, Iraqi Interior Ministry forces discovered the bodies of 10 people who were tortured and killed execution-style in various parts of Baghdad. Also, armed men kidnapped several officers from the Iraqi Civic Defense Center in Baghdad. In a military offensive operation in the town of Beit, north of Baghdad, the United States Army announced that it has killed 2 armed men and detained scores of others. In addition, a British soldier was killed in an armed attack against a British Army base in Basra in southern Iraq. For the 5th consecutive day, the elite Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards continued to carry out the Great Prophet II war games. They have successfully test-fired several mid- to long-range anti-armor weapons. Meanwhile, Major General Yahya Rahim Safawi, the Supreme Commander of Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, has downplayed the United States' threats against his country, saying that it is unlikely that Washington will carry out an airstrike against Tehran.
اختبارات لأسلحة جديدة واختبارات للمواقف أيضا. فمع انتهاء المرحلة البرية
The elite revolutionary guards continued to test fire new weapons on the fifth day of the Great Prophet II military maneuvers. The Iranian armed forces have successfully tested several long-range anti-armor weapons, which are capable of hitting an enemy 120 kilometers away. The new generation of anti-armor weapons was successfully tested on the fifth day of Iran's war games. The armor-piercing weapons include a rifle equipped with special vision that can identify an enemy 7 kilometers away. Meanwhile, Brigadier General Mohammad Hijazi, the head of the recruitment division of the Iranian armed forces, said that it is not in Washington's interest to hit his country. Furthermore, Yahya Rahim Safawi, the supreme commander of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, said that the U.S. administration realizes what Iran is capable of doing at this stage.
الأمريكيين يدركون تماما ما تقوم به إيران في هذه المرحلة.
I do not think that the Americans will create problems for us, realizing the danger involved, especially considering that their forces are well spread over a 2,000-kilometer radius and not too far from us. We test-fired some weapons, and more will be tested in the upcoming maneuvers.
أسلحة جديدة في طريقها إلى الاختبار، إلا أنه وبتقدير أصحاب الخبرة
Many weapons have been test-fired and more will be tested, but none has outperformed the Shihab-3 ballistic missiles, which were tested at the beginning of the maneuvers. Meanwhile, Tehran reassured neighboring countries that its military exercise was not meant by all means to intimidate or threaten them. To whom is Iran trying to flex its muscles? The answer can be revealed by the Shihab-3 ballistic missiles, which can identify and hit enemy targets at a long-range distance.
احتفلت شبكة الجزيرة أمس
Al Jazeera Television celebrated its 10th anniversary since the launch of its main Arabic language channel. Journalists and employees of Al Jazeera were honored during the event, which was attended by many Arab and international figures.
The Eastern Symphony of Marcel Khalifa described from Italy an Arabic success story, launched from Doha on a night like this 10 years ago and changed the face of journalism.
What sets Al Jazeera apart is that it was built on a strategic conviction. It was not done at the spur of the moment. It was a strategic, well-planned decision to provide a venue for one voice and a counter-opinion. This is what has distinguished our work in the last 10 years.
10 years with its high and low points were shown this evening for a channel that brought back the free press, its courage, credibility, and reporting the truth without bias.
However, some politicians and authorities in today's world had a different opinion. They cast doubt and made accusations, and then they harassed and targeted the channel. But what has been inflicted on its reporters and offices only strengthened Al Jazeera's determination, and its editorial policies maintained its professionalism and balanced reporting.
Glory can only be overshadowed with something that is more precious.
Some of our tree leaves fall too early.
The night of November 1st, 2006 was a night of devotion to those who sacrificed their lives or freedom to deliver the truth to viewers, just like it was a night to honor those who started the mission with Al Jazeera 10 years ago.
I have feelings of pride and belonging to this station, which was challenging to us. For me personally, this station is like a little tree that grows before your eyes, and this is a beautiful thing.
مروا لكلمح البصر حقيقة رغم
The 10 years passed like lightning despite the pain, joy, exhaustion and effort which went into the building process.
رافق مسيرة البناء والعطاء.
Al Jazeera continues to deliver its promise. Those in charge of it stress that the viewer is at the center of its policies. They recently announced that an English language Al Jazeera and a documentary Al Jazeera will be launched soon, in addition to other projects in line with the channel's commitment. Al Jazeera spent 10 years in the media world providing a platform for opinions and the counter-opinions. Some liked it, others criticized it. But everyone agrees that it has made a 10-year-old difference. Haytham Abu Saleh, Al Jazeera, Doha.
During its 10th year of reporting major events, many questions are being raised. Did the major events put Al Jazeera on the international stage, or did Al Jazeera shape these events?
Do you know where you are?
At school.
Why are you at school?
Because the Israelis are shelling.
Are you afraid of being hit?
Yes.
Was your area hit frequently?
Yes, a little bit.
What would you like to see happen?
I would like that we return to our homes and that the resistance succeeds.
A small beginning to a big story. The seed that was planted in this remote area of the Arabian Peninsula in 1996 has grown into a big success that no one ever predicted.
Until when?
Things must be corrected.
Do you want corrections from the generals who caused our catastrophes?
They did not cause our catastrophes.
They caused our misery.
Al Jazeera brought back to the Arab person his voice to challenge those who have monopolized the media for a long time.
So far, no official count of the victims of the American-British bombardment.
The Iraqi authorities have yet to announce the extent of the material and human losses.
In less than 2 years of its launch, Arabs for the first time watched with Arab eyes foreign aggression on their countries during the Desert Fox operation. Thanks to Al Jazeera's extensive reporting, Arabs lived the Aqsa Intifada as if they were part of it. However, all of these events were no more than an introduction for what followed. The 9/11 attacks paved the way for an era of American wars in the Islamic world. Afghanistan fell under tons of American bombs. Al Jazeera was the only witness there. Al Jazeera also paid the price for being there. Its office in Kabul was destroyed, and later, one of its reporters was thrown inside a prison. But the emotional reward soon followed, as Afghanistan was the launching pad for Al Jazeera onto the international scene.
Baghdad is being subjected to the most violent airstrikes since the beginning of the American-British war on Iraq.
After Afghanistan, there was the invasion of Iraq. Al Jazeera was the most prominent witness of the assault on the capital of al-Rashid. The last time al-Rashid was invaded was by the Mongols 700 years ago. The price was martyrdom. The first Al Jazeera martyr fell when Baghdad fell. Later, its offices were permanently closed, especially after reporting on the horror scenes in Fallujah. The war in Lebanon may not be the last war in the region, but it was different. It was the second time the Arab viewer saw an Israeli campaign being foiled by the resistance since Israel's unconditional withdrawal from South Lebanon in 2000. However, wars did not create a name for Al Jazeera. The channel's attention was directed to the farthest reaches of the world, searching for a human story. In Niger, Al Jazeera uncovered one of Africa's worst famines. In Southwest Asia, it broadcast the first images of the tsunami.
أما تغطيات الجزيرة لقصة الديمقراطية في العالم العربي فكانت احتفالية. تعزيزا ربما لأي بصيص أمل لدى الشعوب العربية.
Al Jazeera's coverage of democracy in the Arab world was ceremonial, hoping that one day Arab nations might have the right to choose their rulers. The last step for Al Jazeera was its transformation into an international network as it prepared to launch its English language channel.
بل صوت الجنوب بأكمله، وسوف تشاهد وتسمع في أركان الدنيا الأربعة.
They kill at any place, any time, and target anyone. Their main victims are innocent civilians, including children. Lebanese continue to suffer at the hands of cluster bombs that have littered South Lebanon and added to the pollution of killing machines left behind by Israel, whether in its latest war in Lebanon or its prior occupation. According to the UN, the density of exploded cluster munitions in Lebanon was higher than those found after conflicts in Kosovo and Iraq, which has already caused alarming amount of humanitarian agencies. The International Committee of the Red Cross said it would be issuing its appeal to an immediate ban on the use of cluster bombs, formally at a 10-day conference opening in Geneva today to review a 23-year-old international convention barring or limiting the use of especially injuring conventional weaponry. United Nations humanitarian chief Jan Egeland called for an immediate global freeze on cluster bombs following their intensive use in Lebanon. The UN said in a statement that hundreds of thousands of people in Lebanon were at risk due to unexploded cluster munitions, marking only the most recent example of the devastating and lingering impact of such weaponry. Egeland, the UN Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, said in a statement, "This freeze is essential until the international community puts in place effective legal instruments to address urgent humanitarian concerns about their use." The appeal came at the beginning of a review conference on a global arms treaty that restricts some types of conventional munitions, which has been ratified by more than 87 countries. Egeland added that ultimately, as long as there is no effective ban, these weapons will continue to disproportionately affect civilians, maiming and killing women, children and other vulnerable groups. The Convention on certain conventional weapon bans or restricts the use of chosen types of weapons that cause unnecessary or unjustifiable suffering to combatants or that indiscriminately affect civilians. The countries involved have so far failed to agree on including cluster munitions. The UN said the density of unexploded cluster munitions in Lebanon was higher than those found after conflicts in Kosovo and Iraq, which had already caused alarm among humanitarian agencies. It added unexploded cluster munitions are a constant threat to 200,000 refugees and internally displaced people in Lebanon, as well as for hundreds of thousands of people returning to their homes and for humanitarian and reconstruction workers. Laos, Cambodia and Vietnam are still suffering from the burden of unexploded cluster munitions some 30 years after the end of conflicts there, hampering farming and keep building projects. In other countries and regions where the weapons had been used more recently include Afghanistan, Eritrea and Ethiopia, Serbia and Montenegro. The international community of the Red Cross reiterated the call for an immediate halt to the use of cluster bombs in conflicts around the world and for countries to destroy their stockpiles. The Swiss-based humanitarian body also said it would be calling on a conference of experts next year to discuss a possible new global impact on the weapons, canisters that can contain up to 650 small pellet explosives that spread over a wide area. But U.S. State Department spokesman Tom Casey defended the use of cluster bombs, but said all efforts should be made to avoid civilian casualties. The State Department said in August it was investigating whether Israel violated U.S. rules in its use of U.S.-made rockets armed with cluster bombs in Lebanon.
The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. Please visit linktv.org/Mosaic for more information about these broadcasters, or to view previous Mosaic programs, obtain program transcripts, or receive the weekly Mosaic Intelligence Report. Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation, the Otto Haas Charitable Trust, and by committed Link TV viewers like you. If you value this program, please send your tax-deductible contribution to Link TV, either through the website or the mailing address listed on your screen. This program was brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. television network devoted to global and national news, with uncompromising documentaries and diverse cultural programs which connect you to the world.